Tuesday, September 17th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Day 2 of Climate Week on this show, folks, and we've got a special gardening day for you. It's a conversation about how climate change is impacting gardening and farming in this province, plus our regular calls, texts, and emails for Gardening Day. So this week, I mentioned it yesterday, right? We had a full climate change discussion yesterday with young people, advocates, and activists around climate change in this province. Folks who are trying to make a difference. Today, Gardening Day, still a climate lens, a climate theme around everything. So the lines are open as per the usual for tips, gardening updates. If you have climate change observations around your gardening, we'd like to hear about that. So the number is 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. You can text us 709-327-8206 or email us thesignal@cbc.ca. Here with me in studio, Dan Rubin, author of Sun, Seed and Soil, Tips and Techniques for a Northern Garden. Dan's also the founding chair of the Food Producers Forum. How you doing?
I'm very glad to be here.
Thanks for coming in.
And it's a beautiful day out there.
Gorgeous. Heather Zurell, owner and data scientist at Data Farms. Welcome back. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me back. I'm excited to be here.
All right. So let's have, we're going to go, we've got a special guest on the line we're going to go to shortly. But just to kick things off for Climate Discussion Gardening Day, just briefly, top of the head thoughts around impacts of climate change when it comes to gardening and farming in Newfoundland and Labrador. Who would like to go first? You're both looking at me.
I'll go first.
Sure.
I mean, one of the big things we notice when it's really sunny, and like we've had the last couple seasons, we've had really hot, really warm summers here on the Avalon, is that everything is growing really, really well. A downside for that as farmers is that all of the weeds are also growing really, really well. So I think what we've noticed, at least, is that the crops are loving the warm weather. Sometimes it's a little weird. We get snow early or late or kind of worse storms than normal. But for the most part, it's been a positive change in the last couple of years, I think.
Interesting.
It is very noticeable that the climate is changing. Indications of hot drought conditions here on the Avalon. I checked in with some of the project sites that we're working with across the province and heard from people in Cormac, for example, that this was not a particularly droughty day. Year for them. But rather than talking about that or our own gardens, I'd like to set a larger context.
Yes, please. Love it.
And the larger context is that we're confused. We're a confused population of monkeys on this planet because we've forgotten our place in nature. And we think that we're separate, and we're not. That is the key. And what has resulted because of our disconnection from ecology, from biology, from reality, is that we've overused the planet. We're in a state called the overshoot. And there are people talking about that online. If you Google overshoot, what that means is that by sometime just past the middle of the year, each year, and the time gets shorter and shorter, we're using all the resources of the planet up. And we're eating up our children's and grandchildren's resources, whether it be soil or oil or food or fish. And climate change is a symptom of the overshoot because in using that up, of course, we create waste. And that includes the gases that we're pumping into the atmosphere that cause the disruption of climate systems. So until we tune into the core question, which is our overconsumption of the planet, there is no solution. And once we do, there are lots of solutions, and many of them are in our farms and in our gardens, and love to talk about them.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That sets the table perfectly for the conversation, folks. It is, go ahead, Heather.
Yeah, no, I thought that was really great background because, we talk about sustainability a lot and what does that actually mean? And, what it means is, the planet can only produce so much food, kind of consume so much carbon dioxide, and replenish so much of the atmosphere every single year. And if we're consuming more than the planet can replenish, then that's what you were talking about.
Yeah, that's the root of it.
Exactly. So, is it possible to feed everyone on this planet, to house everyone on this planet, to educate us, to keep us warm, and without consuming more than our planet has to offer? That's not currently the way that we live on our planet, but I think it's possible, and that's what people like Dan and I are trying to do with our technology, is to help farmers reduce their reliance on chemical inputs and get back to a healthier balance with our own planet, where it's taking care of us and we're taking care of it as well.
Yeah, there are definitely ways, there are options for how you grow food that restore soil. And when you restore soil, and when you plant cover crops, and when you use animals along with plants to restore the nitrogen cycle, one of the things that happens is that you sequester carbon. And you decrease the amount of carbon dioxide and methane you're pumping out, and you put more of it back into the soil. And the result in the carbon-rich soil is a healthier ecosystem. There are billions of creatures living in a teaspoon of soil. And when they come back, they heal the land and they store carbon. We can do this.
I love the optimism. Let's go to Rodney Reed, Climate Change Manager, NL Living Lab. Rodney's on the line. How you doing?
Good day, everybody. I'm great. It's a nice sunny day here in Central.
Excellent. It's sunny here in the Avalon too. I'm looking at the leaves move outside on the trees in the parkway, and also the other sign of this time of year. I'm still looking at the construction outside. So it's a seasonal thing. Tell us about your position and what the NL Living Lab is.
Yes, so I work for the Federation of Agriculture here for the province, and I'm also in charge of a project called NL Living Lab, which is a project that is very innovative, which is supported by research. So it's a collaborative approach. So that's the whole idea of the Living Lab, which is there's 14 of them across Canada. That helps with that regionality in those ecoregions that the research is happening in the farmers' fields. So right now the project is set up right across Newfoundland and Labrador. So there's two core sites that are on the west coast in Cormac, and St. John's in Mount Pearl, and then in Labrador as well in Happy Valley Gooseway. With this project, there's 4 different partners. So the Federation of Agriculture is the lead in that, and also partnered with Agriculture and Ag Food Canada, Memorial University with Grenfell campus, and also the provincial government. What's unique about this project is that the research is happening on the farms and it's for the end user. So there's engagement through the whole process. And the end goal of this is also to help mitigate the climate change of reduce those GHGs, get better at nitrogen use. Also, as I just listened to you guys talking there, talking about cover crops as well. So that's happening as well. So both in annual forages and in vegetable production as well.
How much has changed in the last 20 years here when it comes to farming and for what you've been, because you're a farmer too, right? So either for what you've noticed or also with your role for the Living Lab and as climate change manager, give us just your thoughts on the last 2 decades and how much has changed.
Yeah, so things are changing pretty quickly. Yeah, and I am a farmer as well. So we also are responsible for the knowledge technology transfer of this project. So as a research comes together, we'll be able to transfer that to the farming community. Things are moving much quicker than they had been in the past. Instead of those traditional methods of, you read it in a textbook and those were tried and tested and true. But things seem to be moving much quicker than they used to. So what you learn from your parents or the previous generation is not necessarily the same. It's to the point now that even the seasons, farmers are trying to react and try to innovate and pivot quickly. So we're trying to come up with solutions for that. So this is what the whole project is about. At the end of the day, it has to work for farmers as well, or they're not going to try these new innovative ways.
Go ahead, Dan. Jump into the conversation.
It sounds like, and I did attend one gathering about the Living Labs program, and I just want to say, Rodney, that the work you're doing is so important because largely we're caught up in myths and illusions when it comes to farming and food production and where our food comes from. And we really need experimenters, and we really need solid data, and you're out there gathering it. So, bravo. And the thing that I notice in the dialogue that we're engaged in is that, for example, Crown land, access to Crown land, Stats Canada did a study that said that we've lost 51% of our farmland under cultivation in the last 20 years. And whether you quibble about it's 49 or it's 51, that's a whole heck of a lot of loss, right? Compared to other provinces, which in the same time period have lost 8%. And then what happens with the Crown Land program is you get access to Crown Land, but it's forest. Mm-hmm. And then if you take down the trees and clear, rather than restoring existing farmland, you're contributing to climate change, right? So there's some real significant questions around how we farm. And that's what's great about the Living Labs is that it's diving into that, right?
Yes. It's definitely trying to break down some of those myths, of course, with data. And you are correct when it comes to the loss of some land. I will note, though, that we've made many advances in that land production too, and sometimes it looks at how the data is actually reported is some of those nuances.
Yeah.
But taking trees down to replace for crops, is not ideal overall. But at the end of the day, we do have to feed everybody. So how do we do that as efficiently as possible? Also, there's a culture shift when it comes to Newfoundland. Sorry, I just lost it. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's okay. We got you.
Yep. Technology. I have to pivot. So how we shift culturally in Newfoundland and Labrador, moving from Central, for example, being a forestry region who doesn't have that industry anymore. So how to replace that, and how do we feed the people of here today and keep those economics going? So Living Lab also looks at the approach for the end user. So for them to adopt these innovative goals when it comes to climate change, how do they do that? So it has to work for farmers or they're not going to adopt it. So it's also looking at the bottom line of those farmers to encourage the production. So with that end of the day, we have that food sovereignty and security that Newfoundland Labradorians need.
So Rodney, before I let you go, can you just plow ahead 10 to 15 years where you'd like to see things and where and how you think that the Living Lab can contribute to understanding and mitigation with respect to climate change and food security for the province?
Yeah. And then I see a lot of more farmers. I'm definitely with so I'm also connected with the Newfoundland Labrador young farmers. So we did a collaborative event with them last year, and we'll be doing one again with them in the western part of the province in October. So you can check out the NL Young Farmers Leadership Summit. So Living Lab will have a collaborative day there, and we're going to talk about a lot of these pieces. I think as we keep learning more about all these, how to innovate and how to pivot quicker, what we can do on our own pieces of land, if it's small scale or large scale, depending on what your farming is, you're going to be able to see a lot more change. And I think with the conversations we're having now, we're hoping to keep transfer that knowledge and prepare the next generation to be able to maybe do better than we did.
Rodney Reed, thank you so much.
I'm really looking forward to being the keynote speaker at that event and meeting a bunch of young farmers. Rodney, I'll meet up with you then. We'll talk then some more. There's a key dimension here, which is learning. And we're all learning from each other.
Yeah.
And there are all kinds of new aspects, including the technology that Heather can talk about, that she's leading the development of, to do a better job, a more efficient job of using the land. But you talked about plowing ahead, and one of the key learnings is that plowing has destroyed soil
Yeah.
around the world, and that leaving land bare and dealing with pests and weeds and those all other boogeymen that we've created in our brains, rather than seeing them as ecological partners, is part of the shift that we are making now.
So that's Dan Rubin, one of my guests for today. We were just listening to Rodney Reed, Climate Change Manager, NL Living Lab. This is The Signal. It is Climate Week Day 2, Gardening Day with a climate change lens. Heather Zarell is also with us, owner and data scientist, Data Farms. The way it's working, folks, like I said, regular day-ish, right? So if you want to get in touch with us, if you've got questions or garden updates or climate change observations from your garden, give us a call, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. Text us, 709-327-8206, or email thesignal@cbc.ca. So then a couple quick housekeeping regular questions, Dan. First, We have lots of wood ashes from clearing trees and brush. Can we spread them on the grass and garden? Do we need to add anything else to them?
You certainly can spread the wood ash in your garden beds and into your lawn areas, because it will help deacidify the soil and it'll add phosphorus. So wood ash, along with things like maple leaves in the fall, manure, peat, compost, and did I mention maple leaves? All of these are good feed and add carbon to the soil. And yes, you can spread the wood ash.
Here's a text. Currently, still have flowers on tomato plants in the greenhouse. Will they form into tomatoes now? Also, the tomatoes that are on the plants are very slow to ripen. Any suggestions?
Yeah, that slow ripening is a phenomenon that we've seen year by year here, as long as we've been here for the past 20 years. And we joke about how we don't have tomatoes to eat until October. Well, this year, because it's been so hot, we've got tomatoes coming out of our ears. The wonderful little yellow ones called Galena, and all kinds of other ones, cherry tomatoes, and black ones, black tomatoes. So the story on the immature tomatoes in your greenhouse is keep them there, water your plants well, feed your plants. It's going to be a month or more, 2 months perhaps, before it'll be so cold in the greenhouse that they can't keep growing. So if they're in a greenhouse, even an unheated greenhouse, keep them going.
Keep those tomatoes cooking,
They'll
folks.
keep coming. And once you do harvest them, if you have to harvest them green, put them in brown paper bags in a warmish place, and the gas that they give off will help them ripen and turn red.
Thank you for that.
Yep.
So, folks, like regular gardening day, if you've got questions, tips, updates, get in touch with us as normal. And here's a note from Atilia Russell, because I put out the day before the show, I do a promo. It airs it on the go. It airs on the morning show. I don't know where else it airs. But anyways, got this note, right? It says, climate change and grapevines. 17 years ago, I planted grapevines in the back garden, and they grew a couple of feet tall every summer and died back in the fall. No grapes. Then a few years ago, when the summers got hotter and more humid, the vines started climbing the birch trees, at least 20 feet up. And
wow.
Yeah, and she sent pictures outlined in red too to show where the vine is. And it's like, if I was not told that was a grapevine, I don't know what I would think, but I definitely would not think it was a grapevine. 20 feet up, produce grapes. They are small, but good to eat. We leave them for the birds, and they devour them like crazy. While it's nice to be able to grow grapes, we find that our traditional crops aren't doing as well in the extreme heat, and we can see the stress on the garden plants and the trees. So, Heather, we'll go back to you on this. Either thoughts on what Rodney Reed was saying, or what Atilia was saying about the grapes, or anything else you want to talk about.
Sure. Yeah. I've heard of people growing grapes here. We've never done it before, but more and more I'm hearing people have success with it. And, that's not the only instance of things that didn't normally grow here doing really, really well. I'm part of a Facebook group that's about farming and backyard gardening here. And I've been watching people post crops from Labrador, from all over Labrador. Mm-hmm. It's huge cabbages and rutabagas and all kinds of vegetables that are bigger than mine here on the Avalon sometimes. And it just blows my mind. And we recently came back from a tour across the island. We visited some farms on the west coast and in central Newfoundland, and they're noticing some weird things too. Sometimes, like plants that normally take 2 years to start producing seed, a couple of farmers are actually noticing that they're producing seeds after 1 year.
The biennials have been doing
Onions.
this. Wow, I didn't know that.
Onions, yeah.
Onions, yeah.
So, I'm seeing more and more things behaving weird, but growing better and faster. So it's kind of cool to watch. As a farmer myself and a gardener for many years before that, harvest is the best time of the year. So it's just really fun to see all the success that people have had in our province this year.
So I grow grapes. I have 5 different grapevines. I have a Lucy Kuhlman, a Minnesota 78, and several others, both white grapes and purple grapes. And they do take, a few years to get established and rooted. And then they grow like gangbusters, as she has pointed out with her photos. And we harvest grapes, and mostly because they're small and they're tart, what I do with them is I make jellies, but mostly I make wine. And I make wine with a mixture of blueberries and grapes or crab apples and grapes.
That reminds me, I haven't been to your house in a long time. I'm just throwing that out there. I didn't even check the call sheet. Dick Whitaker's on the. Sorry, folks. I'm not being a very good host. Dick Whitaker's on the line from Portugal Cove, St. Phillips. How you doing, Dick?
Oh, I'm okay. I'm busy painting the house and stuff like that. So
Busy.
This is probably only the 3rd time it's been painted since we built it in 1975. This is the last time I'm going to paint it. Anyway, that's by the way. I'm reflecting on 2 or 3 things that have already been said. We've had a grapevine up in our garden here, well up in altitude, by the way, probably 300 feet or more, above sea level. So it's sometimes cooler, but it's a sun trap. It's been growing up the trees here now for probably 25 years, maybe more. The ruff grouse love the grapes. So, to reflect on that, it's a favorite wherever they are. So that's just by way of information. I grew corn here. Mind you, I started it early inside, so it's a bit of a cheating thing. But I grew corn here probably around 1980, long before anybody else did.
Back before it was became in style, before it became popular, right? You were doing it before it was cool.
Oh yeah, and stuff like that. And so, if you tinker around a bit, you can do a lot of things. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. But to move to today's more or less the climate issues, a couple of things. Trees fix a lot more carbon than grass does, so lawns are not all that beneficial. Councils break the faith with their communities by permitting people to rip out the riparian zones and stuff like that, which filter out all kinds of things, and the waterways get polluted. And that needs to change. When you made a regulation, that was a contract with your community. And when you are constantly mucking around with it or ignoring it, that's not good. Moving along to another topic, I believe the current federal provincial farm assistance agreement provides quite a lot for fertilizer management. And that's part of the funding, and so on. So farmers can get to a more balanced management of their use of fertilizers, which will mean there'll be, first of all, better financial management, but on the other side, it will reduce the problems in the waterways. And we have problems in the waterways, as you probably know. They get over-enriched quite quickly by leachates and so on. So there's a few things. And I think we can do a lot more towards this. By the way, the experimental farm was doing experiments with various kinds of crops. When I was in 1965, to extend the seasons for farmers, and things like oats and barley, and and other things. Elsewhere in the world, things like turnips or root crops were grown late and fed to animals. By doing that, you first of all are reducing the import of feed, and feed is very expensive these days. And these are the kinds of things that are now possible. And things like oats, for example, can be green grazed as well. So I think that's enough for me for now, I think. But there are many other things I could talk about.
Mr. Whitaker, thanks as always for the call. I appreciate you contributing to the climate change conversation we're having around gardening and farming here today and this week on the Signal.
Yeah, and put more clover in your lawns, white clover, if you're going to have a lawn, and don't use one of these contractors who takes the grass off instead of letting it rot and refertilize. It takes the fertilizer away and then whacks the fertilizer to it, and that all leaches out into the waterway. So there you go.
There you go.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again. Bye. Good luck with the painting now, too.
I'm getting down to the last strokes, and I'm not fussy, so the windows are a little bit decorated.
Amazing.
Right on, bye-bye.
All right. See you, Mr. Whitaker. Painting. Who likes it? Maybe some people. Thoughts on, Heather, go ahead on what Dick Whitaker was saying.
So that was a ton of great information, Mr. Whitaker. A couple of things that I want to point out that you touched on. One was the government funding program. Mm-hmm. So there's something called the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. They will cover 75% of the costs for some of these kind of management practices, improved kind of nitrogen management like cover cropping, or even 100% if you're a not-for-profit or a charity. So it's definitely worth looking into these programs and seeing where you can kind of get some extra capital to really make the most of your investments in your property. And another thing that Mr. Whitaker mentioned that we haven't talked about but is so important here is season extension. You mentioned starting corn indoors, and because you started indoors, you were able to grow a crop here that historically wasn't available or didn't do well. And I've noticed a lot more crops, a lot more variety growing here than I remember from when I was younger. You think about the traditional, or what I think of as like the Jig's dinner crops, right? Your potatoes and rutabaga and carrots and cabbage. But now we're seeing all kinds of stuff like eggplants and hot peppers and just weird stuff that hasn't been available. I think part of that is influenced by our climate. I think another part is influenced by the market, and that, as our city, as our province is becoming more kind of international, we're getting a lot more varieties of food and therefore a lot more variety of ingredients that people want, which is great. But, the other side of that is that it's getting warmer here and we're actually able to produce this right here.
Yeah, I would agree with Heather that our immigrant communities are wonderful, and they've brought so much so many new ideas for food and for food ingredients. I love it. Going to the farmers market and eating the African food and the Syrian food and all that. I will say that there was the mention of the birds eating the grapes.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect example of permaculture, in that the way of gardening that is called permaculture integrates wild and tame and feeds the birds and the bees, because they in turn are part of sustaining the garden. And they do all kinds of services that are largely invisible until you focus in and see that they're moving seeds and they're fertilizing and they're pollinating and all of that. So again, it's a return to seeing ourselves as part of nature.
Right. Artichokes,
corn, kiwis.
There we go.
Peaches.
Right.
Those are some things that have
And that's
I've
not,
grown.
and that's just
Yeah.
not your nickname for me. I mean, you're growing peaches too.
No. Peaches in Pooch Cove, yes.
Yeah, Peaches and Booch Cove. All right. You're listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. It is gardening day, folks. So we're taking your regular questions. And if you need tips, if you want to give us garden updates, so that you're listening there to Dan Rubin, author of Sun, Seed, and Soil, Tips and Techniques for a Northern Garden. Also, founding chair of the Food Producers Forum. Heather Zurell is here as well, owner and data scientist with Data Farms. And we're going to go to the phone lines, but I will put up the numbers too. 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. You can text us, 709-327-8206. Emails thesignal@cbc.ca. And on top of all the regular gardening day stuff, we're asking if you have climate change observations around your garden. We'd like to hear about that. We've got someone stopped on the side of the highway, so we will get to them right now outside of Deer Lake, I believe. Hello.
Hi.
How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great today.
Excellent. Thoughts?
Well, the harvest moon is coming tonight or tomorrow,
Yes.
and it's Canadian Gardening Day. And I'm on off Facebook now, but last year it was Naked Gardening Day. Is that today?
I mean, for some folks, it's every day, and for others, it's no day.
Okay.
I love this topic, and I have to talk about how gardening forces connection and community and healing. Because we started community gardening in Grand Falls about 5 years ago, and my daughter and my husband and I were involved. But now she's 18, so she's no longer interested in that. But when she was, it was a whole community. It wasn't a family or individuals in a family going and driving through McDonald's and eating on their own. It was a whole community planning food sustainability. And the things it did for my family in particular were crazy. My husband is an extrovert, and me and my daughter are introverts, but through gardening, you can't really be an extrovert and off by yourself. You're forced to be a part of a community. And everyone grows. It's just beautiful. But not only people community, I feel like it brought me right back to nature, and I'm out watching the birds steal all my stuff, and I don't get mad until the crows come after the other birds, and then I get all upset and I go inside. So it's just gardening is forcing us to get back to the basics, the healthy stuff, because you can't do it alone, and you can't do it with just money. You need people power, and animal power, like you said. So I'd love to see more grants for smaller groups to help people get started up with education and funding in their own back gardens. So I've been experiencing with gardening in two different places in Newfoundland, Grand Falls, Windsor, and then Grossmore National Park, and comparing the two. So, Grossmore National Park, some plants are growing better there this year than in Grand Falls. And 20 years ago, I couldn't grow anything there. So in October of last year, I had sunflowers up to my roof in Rocky Harbour.
Wow.
Now, isn't that crazy? So this year I have them above my roof in Grand Falls. I think it's due to the significant amount of sun that we've had this summer. It's crazy.
Go ahead, Dan.
This is wonderful to hear from you. I have been in touch recently with people in Grand Falls, Windsor. We have 15 project sites as part of the Provincial Food Network, and the one for us that connects us with Grossmorn is Grossmorn Farm and Market in Norris Point.
I love that.
They're such great people,
there.
Lori and Boyd. And they've seen huge changes. Actually, last year for them was a drought year. They lost all their groundwater. I think it's a bit better this year from what I've heard from our contacts in Cormac. But yes, things are changing. And one of the things about this that you really highlighted, and thank you for this, is the way it connects our feet to the soil and our heads with the bees and the birds and the healing that goes on. And what we're seeing in the projects that I'm leading now is a shift from community gardens toward community farming. And that's what you were talking about, is people coming
yeah.
together in real community and real solidarity to produce the food that their community needs. And in a town of 500 people or 2,000 people like Pooch Cove, you can actually feed the whole community if you do that in a focused way. If people come together, use the availability of land and resources that are right under our feet, you can grow the food that we need.
Oh, I agree. And the trees, we got to stop cutting down the trees. All the new subdivisions have no trees. I think, Newfoundland has to make a decision on that and decide no more tree cutting. And we're losing a lot of trees, areas that weren't sprayed like Grosse Morne. We're losing our spruce trees. So we need to start planting more.
Thank you so much for the call. We've got a couple more calls to get to, but I appreciate you calling. And just to let you know, World Naked Gardening Day is actually, according to Wikipedia, the first Saturday of May. So you've got lots of planning time, and I don't know if you need practice time for it, but there you go.
I better go get dressed. Bye.
Thank you so much. I thought she said she was driving, but that's a question for a different show. All right. This is Gardening Day. It's Gardening Day on the Signal with as part of Climate Week, right? So we're talking about regular Gardening Day, but if you want to talk about climate observations in and around your garden, in your neck of the woods in Newfoundland and Labrador, give us a call, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255, the signal at cbc.ca. Before we go to the phones, Dan, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to jump in and say that one of the things that I highlighted in my book, in Sun, Seed, and Soil, is that there's a yearly cycle. And if you start in the winter, which I call garden dreaming time, and you browse the seed catalogs and order way too many seeds, like we all do, then you're ready in March and April to start these seeds in sterile potting soil indoors under lights. And as Dick Whitaker mentioned, and as Heather mentioned, that's how you get the early jump on the season. That's how you extend the season, is starting early indoors.
All right, check out these pictures I'm going to show both of you. So that's from Yvonne Feltham in Clovertown. So Yvonne sent a note. She said some tomatoes she picked too early because she was worried, which is why they're green. And then below that, though, are the tomatoes that she grew that are gorgeous in color.
Oh, beautiful.
Right? Wow. And Yvonne's on the line. How you doing?
Good. I just want to mention that's the topic I like, because now I try to improve my backyard, small backyard, to be like eatable and beauty. So I grow them flower and fruit and mix, and I use like same bed. I use like rotate. Like I grow flower first, and then I throw some vegetable seed, and then they grow, and I have some cucumber in my flower bed. So normally I grow cucumber indoor, but they never grow soon enough. But this year I just spring seed outside, and they grow better than in the greenhouse.
Wow, so your cucumbers better than in the greenhouse. Yeah, my parents grew some and brought some in. There are loads of cucumbers out in your area.
Yeah. And besides, I want, like at a question, I want to go grape outside. I have a patio in the garage. So yesterday, by the way, I met your aunt. I bought her a fence door. I want to make like a little bit outside sun pot, and I think I would like to go some grape. My question is, can I go grape in Clovertown outdoor?
Can you go grapes?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what
kind of bit? Because last 2 weeks ago, our friend come from Mannequin. I'm not sure what it. she go grape and very tiny but very sweet. So I like to go grape outside. Like climb up on my patio. But I want to make like a sunroom outside.
Ooh, that sounds
So what
nice.
kind I should go in Clovertown?
rather than suggesting a particular variety, because there's many that will work here, I would avoid buying grapevines from the big box stores in the spring and go online and search for northern adapted grapes. The University of Minnesota has done a lot of development of grape varieties. So anything that's labeled Minnesota, like the Minnesota 78s that I planted, is going to do wonderfully here because they've been working on that.
Where'd you get yours when you planted the Minnesota 78s? How do you get
I
those?
think I got them through Vessies.
Okay.
But there are other places like Hardy Fruit Tree Nursery, Vessies, places that are Canadian that you can order from. And if somebody you meet or you know or you're in touch with has a grapevine, you can take a cutting from it, in the spring and root it and plant it, and it will grow.
Well, that sounds nice.
And that's another way. Heather,
Yeah,
what do you
good
know about
idea.
grapes? Grapes?
Not much. I haven't grown any yet.
Yeah.
I'd love to try.
So we've got 5 different varieties. Some are doing better than others. I mentioned Lucy Kuhlman, Minnesota 78. But I would be very cautious. I'm trying to put my tongue around it, a variety that we've bought twice that has failed and died here. So not every grapevine will be fine. And that's true for many plants in nurseries. Not all are well suited to our climate. That's another advantage of starting early with seeds that are northern adapted. Join Seeds of Diversity. Join seeds.ca, and you'll find everything you need there for seeds and plants.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yvonne. And here we go. Someone else sent in a text just of grapevines again, right? Grapes.
Yes.
Right.
There's a brilliant one growing behind the cafe in Brigus. If you have your burgers outdoors at Brigus and you look over your shoulder, there'll be a grapevine just covering a fence.
See? I like
Loaded
that.
with
Sounds
grapes.
good. We got Jeff on the line from Gander. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good. I'm calling for a friend who has a tree. Well, at least one. I don't know if he has more, but it's a plum tree, and he also has damson. But he tells me they've developed black knot,
Yeah.
and he doesn't know if that's something, if he can do anything, or if that's the age of the tree.
Black knot is a fungal disease spread by spores through the air. It comes from the pin cherries and the wild damsons that are growing all around us. It is not a fatal disease if you prune it out. So on my plum trees that are producing very well, black knot flares up on little side branches. I cut it out. Don't burn it. Put it in the trash. Cut it up, put it in the trash. And then the pruners that you use to do the cutting, sterilize them with bleach because you can spread it. And if you're consistent in pruning it out, you can maintain the tree's health and fruit production. Damsons, by the way, if people don't know this, are related to plums, but they don't have that nice little bum crack that plums have.
Yeah. So could the damson that he has be causing the problem in the plum?
Well, it'll spread to any of the stone fruits, which are cherries, plums, damsons, almonds. Yeah. And but it could be just coming out of the air from everything around us because, as I mentioned, the other wild fruit trees like the pin cherries and wild damsons, they will spread the spores as well.
Yeah.
So they could be picking it up and then transmitting it for sure.
He had heard that the wild cherries were, but pruning it out, and if it has gone too far, he should over time get back his plum tree.
That's been my experience, and we've had an experimental orchard that Tree Canada supported, and that included planting some plum trees. They get the black knot, so I go along with my clippers and I take the branch that has the black knot on it out, and I just keep doing that year after year. It never quite eliminates it, but it does restore health to the tree.
It allows that. That's perfect answer. Thank you very, very much.
All right, thanks for the call, Jeff.
I hope Eric is listening. I told him it on the radio.
And hey, we podcast the show, so if he misses it, you can go back and listen.
Okay, thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks again. Bye-bye now.
See, that's right, folks. We're available on the CBC Listen app. So if there's any time something on gardening kind of just passes by like it can do in radio land and go off into the ether, it's there. You can access it after. Go ahead, Dan.
I have a question, and the question is for Heather. Data farms. I'm really curious, and I'm sure the listeners are. What are you doing with sensing that can help us reduce climate change and restore crop health and deal with climate change?
Yeah, so we use several different kinds of sensors to try to get an idea of what's going on and what do the crops need at any given time. So, one way we can help reduce the environmental impact of growing food is by measuring precisely what nutrients are in the soil. So you don't over-fertilize. And, if there's too much fertilizer in the soil, you think, that'd be good for crops. But, in the season, they can only absorb so much. And if there's excess stuff that you've put in there, extra money, extra fuel, extra, chemicals that don't need to be there, when it snows and then and then in the spring or summer when it melts eventually, it'll kind of dissolve everything in the soil and wash away a lot of those nutrients. So it's not necessarily a good thing to add as much fertilizer as possible. So, if we know exactly what's there, we only add, a little bit that's needed, the little boost that the crops need to get really good yields. We can reduce how much of the fertilizer is being washed away into the environment. And, when you're only applying what's needed, where it's needed, when it's needed, you're also reducing the fuel and the greenhouse gas emissions that are caused by actually going out there and spreading the fertilizer itself. So, that's how we use soil sensors to help reduce the environmental impact of agriculture.
That sounds really good and really important because, of course, farmers have to survive financially, and everything's getting more expensive, including the inputs, and you're talking about making it efficient and effective. I will mention that I attended for the Tree Canada grant a workshop with a wonderful man named Stefan Subkowiak, who's a permaculture orchardist in Ontario, and at one point he said, we don't have aphids anymore. I said, why not? He said, well, we've reduced our nitrogen into our crops. Aphids feed on the nitrogen. So aphids are a message. The message is too much nitrogen. I didn't know that.
Wow.
So interesting. And what you're talking about, Heather, is making farming not only less damaging, but more affordable.
Exactly.
And that's awesome.
Yeah, and what's better than making fresh local food more affordable?
Yes.
Actually, this is a good segue into something that I wanted to mention from the very beginning.
Yes, please.
So, if you're sitting at home in your car thinking, I've never been able to keep a plant alive. There's no way I can help, be more sustainable in how I get my food. But that's not true. There's a lot that you can do, even if you're not farming and gardening at home. And one of the most important things that you can do here today is to buy your groceries from a local farmer.
Yes.
Buy your food from the local farmer's market. And just think about it. If that was grown here, it was brought to you, and that's it. It's healthy, it's fresh, it's local. And think about all the greenhouse gas emissions that you didn't need to burn, that you didn't need to put in the atmosphere because that hasn't traveled from some country far away where it was grown and then somewhere else where it was packaged and then, eventually it got to you. So, even if you're not doing this yourself, you can make such a big impact in making your personal supply chain more sustainable.
And the length of time, the length of time that you can keep stuff that's grown locally compared to if it's shipped in, right? Because sometimes I feel like if I buy a cucumber that was grown away, I transport it home, and by the time I get home, it's mushy, I throw it in the garbage. As opposed to the cucumbers I got from my parents the other week, and I was like, these things are still kicking in the refrigerator. We just finished the last one a couple days ago, Mom and Dad, thank you very much. But, it just, as case in point there, just to show that part too is a big deal.
Absolutely. If it was grown on the other side of the world, that could have been picked 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Or 3 weeks ago.
Or 3 weeks ago.
Traveling in a refrigerated container, the food is constantly losing nutritional value. So the broccoli that we eat now, which is grown thousands of miles away, as opposed to the broccoli we were eating 50 years ago, has half the nutrient value, half the food value. In a sense, it's an illusion that it looks great when you take it home. And then, as you mentioned, it doesn't last. So that's one of the huge reasons that if you're here on the Avalon, join the Killick Coast Food Hub. And there's more than 200 products listed online. You can order them online. You can pick them up in Portugal Cove or Torbay, or have them delivered to your door by Big Feed Club. The options are there. The farmers markets are there in a couple of places. And we need to develop systems for storing and delivering food at the local level. That's for sure. Yeah.
Definitely.
So how do both of you feel then? There's only 4 minutes left of the show, 3 minutes. I asked this yesterday to the crowd that we're in, the young folks, the advocates and activists around climate change. You can there can be senses of dread and despair when it comes to climate change, and like the overall thought of like, oh gosh, how can we do anything? And then there's also though folks who can feel hope as well. Where are you? Because both I get like a mix of a sense.
You have to get out of your head, folks, and back into the garden.
Yeah.
And as soon as you do, you'll have this big sigh and you'll go, and reconnect in whatever way you can with the living world. That's where the hope lies.
Thank you.
Because so much of the time we're talking, and we're not doing it. And I'm very pleased right now to be part of a project that's raised $400,000 for local food production, and we're seeing the results. We're seeing, in some cases, doubling of capacity in local communities. So I feel very hopeful.
Heather?
A bit of both.
Yeah. I mean, it's a mix, right?
Yeah. I mean, I remember the first time I learned what climate change was. I probably would have been about 10 or 11 years old, and I was terrified.
Yeah.
For a while, I didn't think that we could get to a point where, our planet could replenish what we were consuming and what we were destroying every year. Though I'll admit, over the last few years, I'm starting to see more and more hope. With all the modern technology that we have, you can talk to a computer like it's a friend now, but why can't we apply some of this to improving our relationship and our balance with our own planet, our only planet? So I think, there's a lot of technology and a lot of kind of, we're moving in the right direction. And I want to highlight, a type of technology that Dan uses, which is the earth-sheltered greenhouses. And so this is a physical technology that's used to extend the season. There's no chemicals here. There's no weird stuff growing into your plants. But you can grow more food for longer. I think the O'Brien's one, it didn't go below 0 degrees all winter.
Oh, really?
So
we haven't been
food
too connected,
for
so that's
long,
great.
even here, with this modern technology. And, it's not genetically modified. It's not some, weird pesticides or herbicides that you're putting on it that can impact your health. There's a lot of tech that's kind of physical hardware that's, getting us away from our reliance.
Growing smarter and better with technology.
Yeah,
Exactly. Can I ask, there's one more late question came in. I don't know if either of you have a thought on this, and we could obviously fill a lot of time on it, but could you ask for comment on how industrial animal farming is affecting the environment?
Oh, it's terrible, and we need to get away from that. But we do need animals as part of the nitrogen cycle. And I know farmers who raise animals and slaughter animals, and they love their animals, and they give them a really beautiful life while they're alive. But all of us, myself included, will become compost at some point. So it's a question of doing away with the factory farms and returning to a style of agriculture that's more old-fashioned and traditional. That's my response.
Heather, 15 seconds to you, or 20 seconds?
I think intensive agriculture in any way is damaging for the earth that you're doing it on, whether it's all one type of crop, like a monoculture that you have to put a ton of fertilizer and lime on to keep it growing every single year exactly the same, or if you're doing the same thing with animals, trying to, on the minimum amount of space, grow and raise as many animals as possible, it's always going to be bad.
Yeah.
It's
a matter of scale, and we all are part of the problem, so we all can be part of the solution.
And that's a great place to leave it on. Dan Rubin, Heather Zarell, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, folks, thank you for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Climate Week Day 2 is done. Tomorrow's Day 3. We will have a climatologist with the latest on climate risks and what they mean and for how we respond to them. We'll look at nature-based solutions from our friends at Memorial University, and we'll put a climate lens over doing business and what makes dollars and cents. That is all tomorrow for Day 3 of Climate Week here on The Signal. Thanks, folks.